Welcome to ECO735. This is your week 1 lecture and it just covers a bit of what your assignment 1 does. It is just as you would have found that with assignment 1, try to look at every aspect of the course that you would do. So this lecture you'll feel is a bit all over the place, but only mainly because it takes a little bit from week 1, a little bit from week 4, and a little bit from week 7. So in terms of the main things we'll be covering for this course, we will be covering the theory of international trade. So those things are linked to Adam Smith and the other guys like him that came along and other theories. So like your absolute theory, your comparative advantage theory, your HO theory. So these are some of the things that we're going to cover. We're not going to cover all the theories, but that doesn't stop you from reading on those theories and then including in some of your essays or stuff like that. So whatever work we cover in this course, you can always pull anything from any other readings that you might have decided to do. Sometimes maybe something in this course you didn't get but somebody else understood. You're welcome to go research it further. It's up to you. Not everything from all your readings is covered in the slides. So that's why it's important you read through all that course material that I gave you. And maybe you can surprise me and put things in that maybe I didn't include in the lecture slides or didn't expect you to know. I count in your favor. So that is the theory part. The trade intervention and policy. So a lot of this is familiar to you. It's like what is the policy another country has with another country. So country A might have an export policy, an import policy, or whatever other policy they have with each other. But there's also industrial policy. So those are other things that we're also going to look at. So that's not be all and end all, but we're going to specifically our focus here, even though we will cover industrial policies, that we will err more on the trade policy side. So we'll look at why certain countries take a certain approach in terms of trade on another country, and why maybe 50 years ago a certain trade method or trade policy that was applied maybe is frowned upon now. But as we see, you will see as we go along, this will become a lot more clear. And then the third thing here, regionalism and multilateralism. This is the course keys concepts to cover. So in regionalism and multilateralism, we are concerned with multiple countries combining with each other within the same region or maybe over the same continent. And what is their approach together for trade amongst themselves and maybe with trade with other countries from other continents and stuff like that. So this is the type of thing we're going to look at for regionalism and multilateralism. And then we're going to look at the conditions these countries are faced with. And based on how they are facing these conditions, is it possible for them to follow these other philosophies that existed before in terms of approaching trade with another country? So we'll look at the models also, the models of regionalism or of economic integration in a sense. And we'll just cover the one model. We'll just cover the linear model. That's all that I need required from you. And you'll find that in general, that is the approach most countries do. But that is not the only approach, but that will be our main approach. And then in the last section here, the Southern Africa and continental focus. So that is the expansion from regionalism that I was speaking about, where we discuss how the condition of these countries grow, what are the circumstances facing the industry and that, and how that impacts on where they want to go, and what is the goals these countries are combined together. What are they aiming to do? What is Africa aiming to do? What is South Africa aiming to do? So our main focus would try to be towards South Africa, but that is already looked at in week 10. And you're not needing to focus wholly in South Africa, but knowing the condition of Africa in a whole is very important. So this was just a little rambling of the things we need to cover. There's something new this year that is not included on the slide. We're going to be covering BRICS. Main focus of BRICS is just I thought, okay, let's add in a other type of combination of countries joining together. In terms of BRICS, it's a lot of developing countries joining, all being on different continents in a sense. Is what is the approach in terms of growth, and how from South African side is where we're going to focus. How South Africa's inclusion in BRICS is going to aid with Africa's growth in that. So that is our main focus. Anyways, let's move on to the next slide. So in terms of the main theories and then the things that I've discussed already, absolute advantage, that is by Adam Smith, and then the Ricardo's comparative advantage, and then a Hexel and a Auckland model we're going to do, and then there's something we're also going to cover intra-industry trade. Those are the four main focuses for our theory we're going to cover. And the main things you need to know from this model is, what is the model trying to say? How does it relate to the real world? Can it really be used in that sense? What are the assumptions on the models? And based on those assumptions, does it have any strengths and does it have any weaknesses? And that's how I'm going to approach this. You are not forced to approach this in the same manner, but it would be nice if you are able to approach this in a similar manner. Especially if I'm going to ask you a question is the Ricardian model the best for explaining trade patterns internationally? And then you have to go about it. It's like, okay, what does the Ricardian model say? It says this, it says that, it says that. It is based on these assumptions. How realistic are those assumptions for this model? And does then a Ricardian model cover what the world says? And then you have to say, okay, but there is this other model that Smith mentioned, and it covers this and that. It is better in these aspects, but it's maybe weaker in these aspects. And then you can bring on, okay, what does the empiric says? And then that's when you're going to look at maybe something as a Leontief paradox and what that says. And these things will become a bit clearer, but you need to be able to understand all these models that you can make comparison across them to say which is the best model. You're not forced to approach it in terms of what empirics say or what in terms of assumptions says and that, but you just need to make a good argument that this is the better model. Or you can argue that there is no good model, but then you have to show a whole lot of models and why they're not really good. We have to show what really is good from them, and if we add a combination of them, it's fine. I think what you would have covered in trade the previous year, when you did international trade in undergrad, then you would have done the gravity model. It's not really covered here. You can bring in the information from there and discuss it in your arguments. You're not forced to stick to these models, as I've said. In terms of trade intervention and policy, so our main focus here will be in terms of tariffs, quotas, subsidies, mostly in the relationship with countries. And then we also look at something like hidden tariffs. And we'll find that with hidden tariffs or non-tariff barriers, that this is the main problem you will find with Africa. It's not in terms of cutting the tariffs down or having high tariffs and that. Is that certain relationships and that are hampered because these exist or these are artificially generated, or how I put it, completely deliberately generated, so that you might not charge another country a high tariff, but you make the process for him to bring a product towards your country or into your country very, very, very difficult. And you subtly use these things to enhance your country's trade with other countries, but then you hamper other countries' trade. But a lot of countries know of this, so there's always this concept of retaliation. So always remember, even though you're generating, you're thinking about the interests of your country alone. You must always think about what is going to happen as when other countries are involved. You can't just think about your country and say, okay, this works for my country. And then you forget, hey, but this country's response is going to be so and so and so. So be careful with something like that. Moving on to regional and multilateralism. As I said, the linear model is going to be our main focus. We're going to mention what it is. We're probably going to mention it in this introduction lecture. I might never cover it again. And then we're going to look at different types of developments, different types of countries banding together. So we're going to look at it something like NAFTA, which is a North American Free Trade Agreement, which is an agreement between all North American countries like Canada, United States of America, and Mexico. And we'll look at why that has worked really well. And then we'll look at something as SADC, which is a combination of a lot of countries. Maybe why that does not work. And maybe always what you can do is, especially for this course, is to have one of these organizations at the back of your mind always. Say, okay, this course worked. This organization or this agreement amongst countries worked because I had this and this and this conditions. And maybe for Africa this is not working because maybe NAFTA was good at this and this and that, and SADC wasn't good in those aspects and that. Or you say SADC was good in this aspect. So you need to at least know, I would say, two types of countries coming together and forming agreements really well. I would recommend you know African agreements really well, and maybe something like SACO, maybe like something like SADC here, and then maybe knowing NAFTA. We're not going to cover the European Union, but it's also good maybe to know that and why that work. As you saw, as part of a big assignment, the European Union exit or Brexit. I kind of tried to relate it in terms of Africa, your assignment. So I was like, okay, what happens if one of a developing country or African development country exits a agreement? What is the impact on the countries in that? But that's your assignment. For now, the European thing, the EU, I didn't want to ask Brexit. Maybe I would have asked Brexit in the terms of asking you how that impacts on South Africa, but I left that. Anyways, let's move on. Oh, also remember, this will definitely be tested. Anything with economic integration, regionalism is gonna be tested in some essay question and that. So it's important, very, very important to know this. Most of the sections that we would cover, if we move back to these four things, you will definitely get a question on theory. You will get a question on intervention and policy, definitely. You get a question on regionalism and multilateralism. And maybe on the latter one, maybe it's on BRICS. So there's a possibility of all this coming through. I would highly say out of these four topics I presented here, and with BRICS that I did not insert here, you will get at least 50% of your questions coming from here. As I told you, that essays that I've given you as part of the assignment is critical for you, helping you towards your exam. Okay, let's move on to Southern African continental focus. So our focus is Africa. And why is it different from all the other countries? And you would know, automatically speaking, the main difference, well, there's a lot of countries who would have faced the same thing, but our continent, Africa as it is, colonialism. We were cut up and divided, and that impacted on a lot of the difficulties we face in terms of growth. And some people might say that's million years ago, but sometimes that things linger and is still existing in that. And we will discuss some of the things around them. So, as I said, this will definitely be tested. So, in all, let's move a bit forward, but with the introduction classes. So, we look in terms of consumer and producers. So, why is international trade important in this sense? And if you look at it, and you look at country and all, that is everything that we consume, that we use in our household or wherever we may be, is that produced in our country alone? And that is probably a definite no. If you look at the clothes that you wear, a lot of us would like to wear a lot of American clothing, in a sense, Western clothing. But where is that mostly produced? China, Vietnam, all these funny countries and that. So a lot of what we produce, of what we use in our country for ourselves consume is not produced here. Although we are moving through these ideas of buying only South African goods and that was pushed down as idea now for generations now, or for decades in that sense. So just always remember that what we consume and what we produce domestically is not only from our country. There is some influence from a neighboring country or for a country that is a bit further. So based on that, all these things that we're not producing or consuming every good from our country here, there implies is some foreign market interaction, either through exports or imports. So for those don't remember, export is when you take your product and you sell it to a foreign country, and imports is when you buy a product from an external country or from an international country. So just remember this. Let's move forward. So what are the important questions you need to be asked? Does international trade merit its own attention? How is trade recorded? Reason for countries to trade, and how do we explain trade? And does foreign trade positively impact on a country's welfare? So these are the questions we're going to ask for this class. Let's move forward to the first question. Does international trade merit its own attention? So the answer would definitely be yes. It definitely is important because it forms a substantial component of commerce as firms produce goods, sold as exports in foreign markets, and at the same time compete against foreign firms in domestic markets. So even if you're producing good, you must be careful that you need to produce it at a decent rate because you can face competition not only from within your country amongst firms, but from foreign firms. It's coming from other countries. And if you look at it in terms of how big exports and imports has been on GDP, you'll find that okay, the information here is older, but it's relatively been similar, and you can go find more recent statistics. But in 2003, South African exports were 28% of GDP, and imports was 26% of GDP. So that's quite a substantial piece of GDP. So also then moving on to other concepts that come from to measure activity in a country at a term of openness. So openness is related to exports and imports. Openness openness is when you add your exports and imports and then you find it as a percentage of GDP or as a ratio to GDP. So you basically see how much of these exports and imports are as a portion of GDP are. So these are the things that we're going to need to consider and look at. So definitely international trade merits some of our attention there. Yes, there's bad things to international trade also. So with the trade with foreign countries, the competition, that can force a lot of our local markets to close down or for us to lose jobs and that. So that's important things to consider also. That with trade, with the world being as open as it is, you can have good things where you are selling a product overseas, but you can also have bad things where it affects your employment and your company growth. So, moving on to the factors that influence our growth in exports. So, there are stuff like agricultural products. What is the country of origin? Where do they come from and that? So usually speaking, within your country, you need to consider, if I'm buying good, where is this coming from? If you know a certain country sells terrible goods and you know it's coming from there, then you might, so in terms of the quality, you might say, no, we don't want this. Or if you know this is coming from a certain country sells the best quality fruits in that, and then you're like, oh, I want that. So you'll find, like in Malaysia, if you ask a lot about the fruits where they come from, and they will say South Africa, because we produce really good fruits. It's the best of our quality we never really see in our market. It goes overseas to other countries where they sell it. So other factors that influence how many exports go out there, besides where the product comes from, is where it's manufactured. How big is the market size? What brand? What are the consumer preferences? The quality of the products, standards and a specification, and most importantly, price. Because sometimes price will include all these factors that we discussed now before. And we also have seen that as a whole, as a country, in terms of our manufactured goods, and why it's important for us is that over a 12-year period from 1990 to 2002, our manufactured exports grew by 75%. So it's important that we take care of knowing what is happening to our exports and what are the factors that are influencing our exports. Moving on to push for international trade. So there are repercussions from opening borders, both in good things and in bad things. So you need to think out, what are these good things that are happening when we open up our international trade borders. Because the good thing is, open our borders, exports increase. If exports are increasing or we have a growth through exports in our market, that means we are creating more jobs. But at the same time, when we are opening our borders, we're creating this local competition from foreign firms that are coming in. It's a good thing. Maybe they will start producing the good more efficiently because of competition. Maybe a bad thing again occur where these companies can't compete with these prices and they have to close out. Which is not a problem if we can utilize those firms or those people that are losing work in an industry that for us is booming. So if we're better at a certain industry, producing certain thing, if we can reallocate all our resources from the firms and from the companies that have failed into the better firms, those that are actually doing really well, then it's not too bad that this competition is coming. But what if you're not really good at anything? And that's a different question in its own. So then it goes on to say is, what are those borders that separates one country from another country? Is it distance? No. You can find that you can have a farm in the Northern Cape and it is transporting about over 1,400 kilometers towards Cape Town wine. So it produces grapes there, it sends down all the way to Cape Town. The wine it takes from these grapes, it comes 1,400 kilometers. Does that make the Northern Cape and the Western Cape different countries? No, distance doesn't do that. Because at the same time, on the border of South Africa, you go to Zimbabwe, that 1 kilometer it crosses the border, that meters that it crosses the border, that is a border. The main thing about a border is that there's probably going to be some law change moving over these borders. Moving from South Africa to Zimbabwe means a different set of rules and a different set of regulations and even though the distance to move over that through that border period or through that barrier is maybe a couple of meters or something like that. So distance does not determine what this border is. But what definitely determines what a border is some regulation change. And you could argue, but under regionalism or under agreement between countries, you might find that the rules or the laws between those two countries, the inter-agreement can be exactly the same. There is a finance world that doesn't exactly exist, where one country and another country have exactly the same set of rules. Even in the EU, even in the European Union, there was no politically exactly the same rules. But everything economically had a process where almost all the rulings were exactly the same within country. So that doesn't exactly exist. So all that you need to remember here that what constitutes a border is probably a set of regulations and that. And the distance is definitely not an indication of how far or of what causes two countries to be separated or to become two countries via this border. So here are some more other type of things to say what constitutes a border. You can go through that, but like special health and packaging requirements. So you might have that in one country that might allow a bit more sulfur in their products than would occur in South Africa. Or the level of toxicity that they may allow in products might vary in medications. So that is also something that might constitute a border. And usually also what that occurs is that if you move into another country across the border, the type of money they use will be different. So these are all things that are indication of what a border is and what separates two countries. So usually speaking, any products that cross a border is called tradable products. And they're never from the service sector. But this may be, especially in our times, not true anymore. We can find that a lot of type of services can cross borders, maybe not physically, but maybe in other forms, especially now with the computer, with the internet being so fast. So with the internet being so fast and with them connecting across the world, we find that there's a lot of IT services that is now become a type of service that crosses borders, even in terms of telecommunication. And even we can find that we can have professional service that can cross borders. You don't need to physically go and meet someone now across the border to maybe help him with law. You can just call up anyone and they might be able to say, okay, this is the process you need for law, for opening, or the regulations you need to see at when opening another firm and that. So generally speaking, a tradable product is not from the service sector. But just remember there are exceptions to this. So moving on to the second question. How is trade recorded? And this is as simple as it is. Exports and imports are recorded in the current county section of the balance sheet of payments, where all other international transactions are recorded. That's as simple as it is. We don't need to hop on the accounting side and the finance side of what we're going to do. We're more concerned at how this relates to growth for country development in that sense. And then you can go on why and how do countries trade, and those are going to do with the trade models that we will be covering. So this is the example I gave maybe last year. Told them this is a possible question, and it's based on maybe week 1 and week 2 and week 3 as we're doing. And but it's like explain how the theory of international trade has developed from pre-Adam time to modern times. And I say here start with mercantilism, and we'll discussing what is mercantilism is, but we'll